Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova. There is a story of the great biblical King Solomon who struggled through an extended period of sadness. No matter what he tried, the king continued to be unhappy. The greatest experts came to the palace and tried their best, but to no avail. Then one day, an old man in tattered clothes arrived at the palace gates. Without uttering a word, the man approached King Solomon, handed him a simple wooden ring, and left. The king looked at the ring, read the inscription that was etched on it, and slipped the ring on his finger. For the first time in months, the king smiled. "What does it say, Your Majesty?" asked the king's counselor. "What could it possibly say?" The king looked up, looked at his counselor, and told him, "This too shall pass." King Solomon replied, nodding his head. "This too shall pass." In Hebrew, the same expression is uttered in 3 words, Gam ze ya'avur. This too shall pass. It's an expression many of us have uttered to ourselves in difficult moments or offered as advice to friends during their challenges. The expression has taken up such a place in Jewish lore that Gam ze ya'avur is a whole industry. Venture down the touristy Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, and you'll find all sorts of rings, bracelets, and other trinkets, emblazoned with the seemingly wise advice, Gam ze ya'avur. This too shall pass. But right now, these words struggle to offer comfort as we observe the holiest days of the year from the shelter of our individual homes. This quotation feels naive as we continue to suffer from the earthquake that is the global pandemic, and as we navigate the storm-tossed waves of this election season. And Gam ze ya'avur, this too shall pass, even comes across as insulting, as we bounce back and forth from the anti-Semitism of QAnon and white supremacy on the right, to the anti-Semitism of the BDSers, as well as Farrakhan and his disciples on the left. And as we struggle to rectify the injustices suffered daily in ways small and large by people of color in this nation. This too shall pass. Yes, we should be hopeful about the future, but we cannot simply wait on the sidelines. On the contrary, as we mark this new year 5781, simply riding out the storm feels like giving up, like hiding, like abdicating personal responsibility. This too shall pass. For some, probably, but not for all. For others, it will be years before they recover physically, emotionally, economically. This too shall pass. But how much suffering and how many dead must we endure before it passes? This too shall pass. Or will it? We know that racism, anti-Semitism, and injustice do not go away on their own. Rather, as we embark on 5781, let us not be passive in saying this too shall pass. Rather, let us make the decisions and act in such a way as to make the crisis pass. The leaves are just beginning to change outside. For many, it feels like we are in the midst of a national and perhaps even global wintertime, and we Jews know from winter. Several months ago, as spring turned to summer, I immersed myself in books about the halakha, about Jewish legal decisions made by rabbis and communities throughout history, who, like us, confronted decisions that were quite literally life and death. Though Shabbat observance is central to Jewish practice, the Talmud discusses at length how the laws of the Sabbath may be suspended to save a life. Later, as a communal response to our suffering during the Crusades, medieval rabbis created the Yizkor service and transformed the Kaddish from a prayer said in the house of study into a prayer in honor of the dead. And over the centuries, many rabbis found halachic justification for Jews who were starving to consume even treif or to eat bread on Passover because we're meant to live by our commandments, not to die by them. And so, as difficult and unprecedented as were the decisions in our own time to stay home and to tune in digitally to our prayer services, these decisions are actually a link in the chain of rabbinic tradition that goes back more than 2,000 years that put the preservation of life above nearly all else. Additionally, The innovation in our synagogue experiences reflect the halachic ingenuity and creative Jewish legal interpretations necessary for Jewish continuity. On that note, while I'm desperate, I'm yearning for us to be safely back together again in person. I'm well aware that the incredible success of our online services has inaugurated another new chapter in Jewish history. Sometimes technological advancements are a blessing. So even though we will be back in this beautiful building, we will be back in this beautiful building. We will nevertheless continue to connect with each other as well through the digital platform. And all of us are called upon to deepen our understanding and use of Judaism online. Of course, technology will never replace a good Shabbos handshake, a Shabbat Shalom hug, or a Shabbat lunch of, yes, egg salad and tuna fish together. In the midst of another winter in history, the early rabbis embraced a similar message of human agency and innovation. They did not simply wait for the situation to pass. 2,000 years ago, the Second Jewish Commonwealth had been brought to its knees. The mighty Romans had penetrated the walls of Jerusalem and set fire to the Holy Temple. At the time, biblical Judaism had placed Jerusalem and the Holy Temple at the very center of Jewish practice, with the sacrifice of animals, grain, and wine as the medium by which we communicated with our Creator. As such, the fire that consumed the Holy Temple nearly consumed Judaism with it. But in that moment, a sage named Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai took it upon himself to usher in a new era in the history of the Jewish people, an era that brought an end to biblical Judaism and began what we now call Rabbinic Judaism. While the Romans laid siege to the Holy Temple on their way to destroying Judea, ben Zakkai faked his own death and had his disciples smuggle him out of Jerusalem in a coffin. Eventually, he made his way to a town called Yavne, where he established a center of Torah teaching, learning, and living. Quite literally, out of the coffin, ben Zakkai resurrected Judaism by transforming our faith from a Judaism based in sacrifices to a Judaism in which God's presence could be felt through Torah study, prayer, and acts of loving kindness. It was springtime again for the Jewish people. That school ben Zakkai founded produced 2 generations later a rabbi named Tarfon, who in Pirkei Avot taught us, it is not your job to complete the task, but you are not free to desist from it either. We cannot solve every problem in the world, but we have more power and more control than we admit. If Judaism teaches us anything, it is that human agency, rooted on God-given values, is the key to overcoming crises. The efforts of humankind shape our world, and the actions of good people bring an end to periods of crisis. So like ben Zakkai before us, we cannot simply wait for winter to pass. We must find our personal mission. We must discover our own role to play. We must act upon the strengths, opportunities, and resources we possess in order to develop our individual calling. For 6 months, we've understandably and appropriately sheltered in place out of concern for our own health and in an effort to preserve our resources for whatever might come. More importantly, we've stayed home in order to show compassion for others' vulnerabilities. We've simplified our lives and we've pulled inward. For 6 months, we've done what we needed to do to keep safe and to keep others safe. Now the time has come to carefully transcend our spiritual enclosures and to wisely utilize our conserved resources, not yet for indoor physical gatherings or unmasked interactions, but for the sake of further extending our compassion toward others while still keeping ourselves safe and healthy. Indeed, in the midst of this winter, we must prepare our communal snowblowers and rig our collective snow plows so that together we will survive these storms. And what our springtime looks like in a few months or in a few years will be shaped by what we do right now. Among the silver linings for me of the pandemic shutdown was the opportunity every day to prepare breakfast and even lunch for my children. There's something instinctually satisfying for parents to provide food for their kids. Most of you know what I'm talking about, the joy of preparing a loved one's favorite meal, of cutting crusts off peanut butter sandwiches, or breaking open the package of cookies, or in my house, of whipping up challah French toast, waffles, or pancakes, almost always with chocolate chips mixed in. And since my wife Rebecca is watching, always with a side of celery and carrots too. But what about the fathers and mothers, abbas and emas, dads and moms right here in our own area, who despite working perhaps multiple jobs, cannot provide enough food for their children, who probably through tears send their children to school hungry, longing for something, for anything to fill that void in their bellies? While we were understandably hunkered down in our own homes, the pandemic has exacerbated terribly the plight of food insecurity. Far too many adults, and especially children, are hungry or malnourished. We Jews, after our experience in the Holocaust, should never let another go hungry. I'd like to ask for volunteers, leaders, and participants to help Zedek mobilize its membership to perform our biblical obligation to feed those in need. From just picking up an extra jar of peanut butter while grocery shopping, to engaging in entire shopping trips for someone else, together we must work to make a real difference in the lives of children and their parents who are just like our kids, and our grandkids who are just like us. Can I count on you? In addition to the growing problems of hunger, the pandemic and its need for physical distancing has caused tremendous loneliness and isolation for those who are aged or vulnerable or living alone. I'm proud of how our board and volunteers assisted the clergy in reaching out to our membership over these last many months. We've learned that whether it's the empty halls of senior living facilities or those of us growing weary from our inability to engage with friends and with family, there is a deep and true loneliness out there. We've had members of our synagogue family who've gone for months without a hug. For our own members then, and as well as for the broader Jewish community, we must organize even more friendly callers, more pen pals, more greeting card senders, and more mask makers. We must also continue to lead, as we've done in the past, in fall cleanup efforts for the homebound. We Jews are forbidden from letting our own be lonely. Can I count on you? The pandemic, too, has swept away the thin veil of racism in this country. The internet is bursting with hate speech and incitements to violence. All we have to do is say the names George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, and we know we've not yet achieved the just society we are commanded to build. Certainly, we must support the vast number of good police officers and other first responders who are genuinely seeking to serve and to protect everyone, and especially our minorities. And we must truly respect as well our neighbors who've taken to the streets in peaceful protest of the injustices rampant in the world around us. We should honor those who are praying with their feet, as Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught. We can and we must engage in listening, in learning, and in bridge building with our intergroup and our interfaith partners. We can and we must be mindful that people of color in this country experience extreme prejudice from individuals and perhaps more often from the sheer structure of our society. We Jews know from discrimination, and we especially know from systemic oppression, and we cannot let others go through what we know all too well. Can I count on you? For the sins of not doing enough to battle hunger, isolation, and racism, the teshuvah starts now. Who of you has just a little time, a little energy, and the inner strength to look outward toward those in need? Who of you has the resources and the desire to help even just a little? We need you. I need you. I'm committing to make the extra effort, and I'm asking you to join me. There is so much work that we can safely do to care for each other, and especially the vulnerable among us, to be the Kehillah Kedoshah, the sacred community and the synagogue family that we long to be. I'm calling upon us as a congregation to feed the hungry, to befriend the lonely, and to pursue justice in the realm of anti-racism. Please contact me after Rosh Hashanah to let me know that you can help, or look for the email that will be coming your way and respond to me. Together we can make a difference, and I'm asking for your help. For many of us, it feels that winter is here, and the ground is very icy. The world is changing rapidly around us, and it's difficult to gain our footing. I believe, though, if we in our own time act with vision and with purpose, with belief in God and a renewed commitment to strengthen the Jewish people and to sustain Judaism, then our future can be one we look to with joy. After all, 2,000 years ago, through innovation, faith, and hope, Rabbinic Judaism emerged from a coffin to resurrect our people and our religion. And less than a century ago, through determination and hard work, the founders of Israel caused a new light to shine upon Zion, and the state of Israel rose from the ashes of the Holocaust. I am excited for the Jewish future, and I'm profoundly confident as well in the future of the United States of America. I do believe that this crisis period shall pass, that this too shall pass when we unite in defense of the most vulnerable, when we work to uplift the fallen and to heal the suffering, and when we seek to celebrate the best in humanity. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. of blessed memory reminds us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. This is true when good people summon their strength to act in caring for others. After all, it was through collective efforts and tremendous sacrifice that many of you remember a half century ago, through peaceful protests and determined marches, that people of every color in this country worked together to advance the cause of freedom and liberty. It was through collective efforts and tremendous sacrifice that some of you remember 3/4 of a century ago, when Rosie the Riveter and G.I. Joe of the greatest generation not only defended us against armies that threatened our existence, but also brought redemption to the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And it was through collective efforts and tremendous sacrifice that a century ago, when America last experienced a pandemic, the Spanish flu of 1918 gave way to the Roaring '20s. May we too, in our own day, advance the cause of freedom and liberty for all. May we too be another greatest generation, and may we too know from the Roaring '20s. May we again come together in joy the way they came together in joy, and may we soon dance just as they danced. May we also remember that whether or to what extent the winter in which we find ourselves will pass is entirely dependent on us, on you and me, and our time to act begins now, in this new year. Yes, we can quote the legend of King Solomon and whisper, "This too shall pass." Better, though, that we should sing that which King Solomon sang in Song of Songs, when he called out, "Rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. For lo, the winter has passed, the rains have come and gone. Flowers appear on the earth. The season of singing has come. Arise, come, my darling, my beautiful one. Come with me." I wish to each of you, Shana Tova u'Mituka. May this new year be for you and for all you love, a new year of health and joy, of innovation and tradition, of justice and compassion, of hope and of peace. And let us say together, Amen.